There is a mountain in southwestern Vermont that the state's geological surveys measure, that hikers mark on their maps, and that the Forest Service technically administers. And yet, in every way that actually matters, it belongs to something else entirely. Glastenbury Mountain rises to just over 3,700 feet. That doesn't sound like much. In the American West, it would barely qualify as a foothill. But elevation is not what makes a place dangerous. What makes Glastenbury dangerous is something harder to quantify: equality. The locals have felt for generations and struggled to put into words. The winds up there move differently than it does in the valleys below. It doesn't gust and calm in the rhythms you expect. It shifts direction mid-breath, as though it's circling something. The trees, dense spruce and fir in the upper elevations, hold their silence with an intensity that feels almost deliberate. You can stand on the long trail where it crosses the summit and hear nothing. No birdsong, no rustling. Just a pressure, like the mountain is listening back. The Abenaki people, who knew this land long before any European surveyor set foot on it, did not come here. That choice was not made in ignorance. The Abenaki were intimately familiar with every river, every ridge, every seasonal migration route across what is now Vermont. Their absence from Glastenbury was purposeful. They called the area cursed or something in their language. It translated inadequately into that word. They believed that the winds that moved through those peaks were not weather. They were something older, something that could take a person and leave no trace that a person had ever been. For a long time, the people who came after them dismissed this as folklore. Then the people started disappearing. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. In our last journey, we stood in a place where people left behind a word and a direction. But here there is no message, no warning, it's just absence, and a mountain that offers nothing in return. To understand what happened on and around Glastenbury Mountain between 1945 and 1950, you have to first understand what the place used to be. That history is part of what makes the silence so loud. In the latter half of the 19th century, the town of Glastenbury was alive. Not thriving, but alive with noise and ambition. Men believed they could extract value from any landscape. Logging operations moved through the forests in waves. A narrow-gauge railroad was laid to carry timber. A charcoal production industry grew up alongside it, feeding the iron furnaces of the region. At its peak, Glastenbury had a hotel, a post office, and enough population to justify its incorporation. But the mountain did not cooperate. The soil at higher elevations was too poor for farming. The timber ran out faster than planned. The railroad became economically unviable within a generation. And one by one, the people left. By the early 20th century, Glastenbury had become one of the least populated townships. By 1937, it was officially deincorporated, erased from the map of functioning human communities. Today, the official population of the Glastenbury area hovers at a number that can be counted on one hand. What remains is the forest. And the forest has moved back in with a thoroughness that feels almost vindictive. The old railroad bed is there if you know where to look, but trees have grown up through the gaps in the ties. The foundations of old buildings are sunk into the earth, covered in moss, indistinguishable from natural rock formations. The mountain absorbed the town the way a body of water absorbs a stone, a splash, then nothing, as though it was never there. This is the place where the disappearances happened. It's not near it, not in its general vicinity. It's not in it and around it, with a specificity that strains coincidence past its breaking point. The name Bennington Triangle was coined much later by author Joseph Citro. He recognized disappearances clustered around a defined geographic area, demanding a label. The term stuck, but the label came after. Events were lived by real people, unaware. The first disappearance is haunting in its simplicity. It's not for what happened, but how it resists explanation. Middie Rivers, 74, in November 1945, a hunter and guide, decades navigating Vermont's forests. He knew those woods instinctively, like his own home. He was not a man who got lost. November 12, 1945, Rivers led for hunters near Glastenbury Mountain. On the return trip, he got slightly ahead, rounded a bend. Moments later, his group followed. He was not there. He was never there again. Searchers combed the area. They found one rifle cartridge attributed to him, and nothing else. No body, no clothing, no sign of struggle. Middie Rivers simply ceased to be. The hunting party was never more than a minute behind him. In that minute, something concluded. Because Rivers was elderly and the forest unforgiving, the case attracted limited attention. It was logged, filed, and largely forgotten. The forest kept its silence. Then, the following year, a young woman walked into those woods and did not come back. This time the whole state noticed. Paula Welden was 18 years old, a sophomore at Bennington College, studying art. By all accounts, she was spirited and independent, feeling the world was larger than assigned spaces. On December 1st, 1946, she impulsively decided to hike the long trail near Glastenbury Mountain. She didn't tell her roommate and wasn't dressed for a serious winter hike. Her outfit was more for class, not a December mountain trail in Vermont. She hitched a ride towards the trailhead, then walked into the trees. She walked into the trees, disappearing into the dense winter-gray forest. This is where her story becomes truly strange and unsettling. An older couple, Ernest and Dorothy Whitman, were hiking the same trail that afternoon. They noticed Welden ahead of them, her red parka conspicuous against the winter landscape. They kept her in view for some time, tracking her movement. They were close enough to see her jacket clearly, no more than 100 yards behind her. The trail at that section was straight and visible for some distance. Paula Welden went around a bend in the trail. The Whitmans followed, reaching the bend within seconds, and Welden was gone. Not obscured by trees, not hidden by a dip in the terrain, simply gone. The Whitmans reported what they had seen. Searches began immediately, because it was December, and she was a college student. The case generated significant alarm. Thousands participated in the search for Paula Welden in the cold Vermont woods. Governor Ernest Gibson was reportedly furious at the lack of a coordinated state response. There was no Vermont State Police then. Search operations were cobbled together from local volunteers, deputies, and National Guardsmen. There was no unified command structure, leading to inefficiency and frustration. Paula Welden was never found. Her body has never been recovered. No evidence of what happened to her in those woods. No clothing, no personal effects. But her disappearance had a profound consequence beyond the search itself. Appalled by the logistical chaos, Governor Gibson pushed for the creation of the Vermont State Police. The institution was established, in significant part, because of what happened to Paula Welden, or rather because of the inadequacy of the response to her disappearance. A young woman walked into a forest and was never seen again. Vermont built a law enforcement agency around the lesson of its own helplessness. The forest kept its secret. Vermont built new structures around the hole where Paula Welden used to be. And still, the disappearances were not finished. In December of 1949, 8-year-old Paul Jeffson vanished. His mother was working near Glastenbury, leaving him briefly in her truck. When she returned, the truck was there. Paul was not. This was 3 years after Paula Welden, 4 years after Middie Rivers. He was found, eventually, making his case different. Searchers with trained dogs located his trail, tracking it through the dense woods. Then the scent simply stopped. Not gradually, but abruptly, as if words were removed. Dogs found nothing beyond that point. Paul Jeffson was recovered alive. But details of what happened in those hours remained incomplete in the public record. But the final case, following Jeffson by only weeks, stands as the most unnerving entry in the Bennington Triangle record, because it aggressively refuses every rational framework we try to apply to it. A true enigma. James Tedford was a veteran. He had survived things most of us will never be asked to survive. He returned from war and settled in Bennington, living at the Soldiers' Home, a facility providing care and community. On December 1st, 1949, James Tedford boarded a bus in St. Albans, Vermont, bound for Bennington. This was the 3rd anniversary of Paula Welden's disappearance, a coincidence whose meaning remains unknown. It was a regular bus, on a regular route, with other passengers. Tedford was observed sitting in his seat. His belongings were with him, organized as if he expected to use them upon arrival. His luggage occupied its space in the ordinary way. The bus made a scheduled stop, and he was there. But when the bus arrived in Bennington, James Tedford was not on it. His belongings were... His hit seat was as it had been, everything in order, except for the man himself. The bus made no unscheduled stops. No passenger saw him exit. No driver observed anything unusual. Somewhere in the course of that ordinary transit, one person had stopped being on the bus. He was never found. No body, no explanation. James Tedford, United States veteran, exists in the record after that date only as an absence. Let's pause here in that absence, because it deserves to be felt fully before we reach for explanations. 5 people, over the course of roughly 5 years, vanished in and around the same mountain. One was an experienced guide who knew the terrain intimately. One was a college student seen by witnesses seconds before she disappeared. One was a small child. One was a veteran who vanished not in the woods at all, but on a moving bus. And the 5th, a woman named Alice McLean, who disappeared in October of 1950 while hiking in the area. She was never recovered, closing out the sequence with the quiet finality of a period at the end of a sentence. The clustering is real, the geography is real, the absence of remains or evidence in the majority of cases is real. What we don't have, what has never been produced. Despite decades of interest from investigators, historians, and researchers, any explanation that accounts for the full pattern without leaving something critical unexplained. Which means we are, at some point, going to have to talk about what the locals have always believed. The Abenaki concept of Glastenbury Mountain involves a place that consumes, it's not metaphorically, but in a specific, literal sense. It's a place where the earth or the mountain itself takes things into itself and keeps them. The land is a kind of appetite. Indigenous oral tradition speaks of a specific geological feature, the moss stone or the swallowing rock. This rock, or formations like it, had the property of absorbing whatever stood on or near it. Animals, people, things. The rock took them, and the rock kept them. The mountain was the rock writ large, says folklore, and it should be understood as such, yet folklore encodes collective experience. The Abenaki avoided Glastenbury Mountain for a reason. Something about that place taught them to. The story of the swallowing rock is one way of carrying that lesson forward through generations. More dramatically, there's the Bennington monster, a creature of local legend. Described as large and dark, glimpsed at the edges of vision, it defies known New England wildlife taxonomy. Reports of the creature predate and continue beyond the disappearances. Whether literal or metaphorical, it represents a community conviction. Something in those woods is wrong. Rational objections are obvious. No evidence for a consuming rock, no photographic proof of a creature. Folklore and eyewitness reports are not the same as proof of anything. But the rational explanations also have their difficulties. The terrain around Glastenbury Mountain is not merely challenging. It is, in the specific way of certain New England wildernesses, deceptive. The mountain looks manageable from a distance. The trails seem clear until they aren't. The forest is dense enough that visibility drops dramatically within minutes of leaving a marked path, and the topography is irregular in ways that disorient even experienced hikers. The long trail, which crosses this area, has claimed its share of the unprepared and unlucky over the years. It continues to. There are also documented, but not extensively mapped, the remnants of 19th century industrial operations that once ran through this area. Mining activity left shafts and excavations that were never properly sealed or marked when the operations ended. Logging operations left unstable terrain, hidden drop-offs, areas where the ground cover of ferns and low growth conceals voids beneath. The mountain, in other words, has teeth that aren't visible from the surface. A person, especially in inappropriate footwear on a winter trail as Paula Welden was, could fall into one of these concealed openings and be extraordinarily difficult to find. The search operations of the 1940s were conducted before the era of aerial thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and modern forensic search methodology. What the volunteers who searched for Paula Welden and Middie Rivers had, essentially, were their eyes and their legs, and their knowledge of the terrain, which was imperfect. This is a plausible mechanism for some of the disappearances, perhaps most of them. The body goes somewhere the searchers can't reach, and the years pass, and the forest continues its work of reclamation. And eventually there's nothing left to find, even if you knew where to look.
Ow.
But James Tedford was on a bus, and Middie Rivers was seen by his hunting party moments before he vanished on a trail, in conditions that should have made any fall or sudden incapacitation visible to people who were close behind him. The geological explanation handles some of the cases and stumbles on others. The supernatural explanations handle the emotional weight of the mystery without providing any mechanism that can be examined or tested. neither framework is complete, neither can be. This is the actual condition of the Bennington Triangle. Not solved by folklore, not solved by geology, not solved by any available framework, just unsolved. A collection of real absences around a real mountain, waiting for an explanation that has not yet arrived. There is a broader question embedded in all of this, though, and it's worth sitting with it for a moment before we close. It is a question not about what happened to these specific people, but about our relationship to wild places in general, and about what we mean when we say that a place is known. We have mapped virtually every square mile of the continental United States. We have satellite imagery of sufficient resolution to read a license plate from orbit. We have GPS systems that can locate a device to within a few meters anywhere, and yet people still disappear in wilderness areas with a regularity that should give us pause. Not because of anything supernatural, but because maps and satellites and GPS coordinates are not the same as understanding. They tell you where something is. They don't tell you what it does when you're inside it. Glastenbury Mountain is on the maps. It has coordinates. You can put it into your phone, and the phone will give you directions. What the phone won't tell you is what it felt like to be Middie Rivers rounding a bend in the trail ahead of people who were 50 steps behind him. What it felt like to be Paula Welden walking into an afternoon that would be her last, wearing a red parka against the gray December light. Not knowing that she was about to become a ghost story and a piece of legislation and a name that people would still be saying 80 years later. The wilderness has always had this quality, though we have spent 2 centuries doing everything in our power to deny it. We have cleared forests, drained swamps, paved valleys, and built ranger stations, making us safer, yet none of it has made the wild places entirely ours. Nature's power endures. Are still corners where the terms of engagement shift in ways we don't fully control. The confidence we carry from the parking lot doesn't survive contact with the actual terrain. Glastenbury Mountain is one of those places. It was before the disappearances. The Abenaki left it alone, understanding something already known by those who paid attention. The disappearances are not anomalies, but confirmations of the mountain's true nature. The town of Glastenbury no longer exists in any functional sense. Wilderness reclaimed it. You can hike through without realizing you're walking through a former community, through streets that had names, past lots with buildings, over an economic beating heart. The mountains swallowed the town slowly, over decades without drama. Seasons moved foundations deeper into the earth. The silence settled back in, and it has not left. A profound, eerie stillness. Somewhere in that silence, if geological theory is correct, are remains of people. In dark hollows below the surface, unseen since the 19th century, in places search parties couldn't reach, where the forest floor is soft and excavations invisible. Or somewhere in that silence, if you are willing to hold on to something older and stranger, there is whatever the Abenaki were avoiding, whatever taught them to name the place as a place to be left alone. Whatever the wind is circling up there on the ridgeline, when it shifts direction mid-breath for no meteorological reason. The cases are closed, in the bureaucratic sense. There are no active investigations. The victims, Middie Rivers, Paula Welden, James Tedford, Paul Jeffson, Alice McLean, exist in the historical record as a series of open parentheses that never got their closing mark. Their stories end at the moment of disappearance. What came after, the record does not say. Glastenbury Mountain continues to appear on maps. The long trail continues to run across its summit. Hikers continue to walk that section of trail every year, and most of them come back. And the ones who do often describe the same quality to the place: the stillness, the directional wind, the sense that the forest is waiting rather than simply existing. Most of them dismiss it as atmosphere, as the natural strangeness of deep wilderness, as the mind projecting texture onto silence. Maybe that's right. Maybe the feeling is just a feeling, and the disappearances are just a series of unrelated tragedies that happened to cluster in a place where unrelated tragedies were always more likely to occur. Or maybe some places on the map simply remain unclaimed. Despite what the maps say, territories that have never truly been surveyed in the way that matters, that have never agreed to the terms by which we consider a place to be known and safe in ours. Maybe Glastenbury Mountain is not a place that belongs to Vermont's geography, the way that the signs on the highway and the coordinates in the database suggest. Maybe it belongs, still and always, to whatever the Abenaki understood it to belong to, something patient, something old, something that has no interest in our explanations. The bus from St. Albans arrives in Bennington. The seat is empty, the belongings are still there. The mountain does not explain itself. It never has. Maybe that's the part that stays with us. Not the theories, not the stories we tell to make it make sense. But the fact that something can happen repeatedly in the same place and leave behind nothing we can truly hold on to. Middie Rivers, Paula Welden, James Tedford, Paul Jeffson, Alice McLean. Their names remain. But the mountain kept everything else. And whether that silence belongs to nature or something older, it hasn't changed. Thank you for being here with me on Whispered Chronicles. Echoes of forgotten lore. If you find yourself drawn to places like this, the ones that don't quite give their answers back, consider subscribing and stay close. There are more echoes waiting. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.